You're listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway with me, your host, Eugene Lee. I've spent the last 4 years trying to discover how to break the burnout cycle. And as a high achiever in a fast-paced world, it's very easy to slip into the old habits that leave you feeling overwhelmed and left behind. And if you're anything like me, then you need to hear this. It's not your fault. Each episode is dedicated to breaking the stigma around mental health in the workplace, ending burnout culture for good, and the action steps that you can take today to do your part towards personal growth and success. And I'm so happy that you are here today. Paul, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you so much for taking the time today.
I appreciate you having me on. I look forward to our discussion.
So definitely coming from someone with over 100 articles and 22 books on management and leadership styles, Paul, what got you so into the subject of leadership?
That's a good question. I played hockey in high school, and my team was always kind of average. And there was one or two teams that were always like one or two in the league. You know, they were the top two teams. And it got me wondering, why is that? You know, why isn't my team at the top? Why aren't we winning championships? And I concluded that these two teams had really, really, really good coaches. And it got me thinking about, what do these coaches do differently than my coach? So that kind of stimulated my interest in, what do the best managers, coaches, leaders do? I went to college and I had a great course by Dr. Paul Hersey, who he and Ken Blanchard developed the situational leadership theory model. And he further stimulated my interest in what leaders do and how to be an effective leader. And that really got me going and stimulated my lifelong curiosity and interest and motivation to study that subject. So hockey got me going.
I think it all starts, I think that's where, let's say, when it comes to sports, I think that's where a lot of leadership, or let's say influence, leadership influence comes from. It comes from a sporting background, I found.
I think there's some truth to that. I think coaches, we see them and their team perform each week, and they get scrutinized and analyzed a lot. I played myself on a lot of different teams and got to observe a lot of different coaches and different styles and what have you. But a lot of the metaphors and a lot of the examples that you see in books and articles relate back to sports. So it's a very convenient way to study what leaders do or what coaches do and critique what they did well or didn't do so well, and, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah, because when it comes to, as you said, all these sports like analogies and metaphors that you use, like I know Tim Grover always speaks about basketball, and there's always baseball analogies in any business books as well. Is it the competitiveness and the teamwork that from the sports that comes into the business, that fits into the business model so well? Is that where the crossover is, or?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think the business world is, you know, competing. You have competitors that you're competing with to attract and retain customers. So I think that's a good comparison between the two. Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to look at it or think about it.
So when it comes to, let's say, a sports leader or a sports coach, what do you feel are the crossover when it comes to the key elements of effective leadership as a sports coach? Is that the same as what you'd expect in a in a business leader?
Well, I think all coaches and leaders should be focused on thinking about what can I do to help the individual or team excel and perform at their best. So I think that's true in both worlds. I think each individual, each team is unique and different, and it takes a lot of good diagnosis from the leader to figure out what does this person need? How can I help them? Do they need direction? Do they need encouragement? Do they need to be involved in the discussion on what our goals are? Or do they need to be left alone? Should I delegate and just empower them to get it done because they're talented and they like working on their own, so to speak, and let them have at it? So I'd say the big idea is leaders need to make sure whatever they're doing is helping the person or helping the team succeed. I used to tell my students, the worst thing you can do as a manager is demotivate people. And some managers do that. They micromanage and they use the wrong style. They turn people off. They, belittle people. They do everything that has a negative impact on the person. Some people come to work, they're motivated, they're excited, and then the boss interacts with them in a way that turns them off, and their motivation goes from high to low, which obviously is not good.
And sometimes the manager does it with the best intention. They
True.
micromanage with the best intention. I've come across before where a manager will come upon the project and be like, oh, the person who's meant to be working on this is out sick today, so I'll work on their behalf. And then when the person comes back, they're like, oh, well, someone's after doing half the work already. And as a result, they don't see it as the manager helping them out. They see it as, oh, this was my responsibility, and now someone else is after stepping in and taking over. And they're like, they've taken away the ownership. And the manager doesn't see that as micromanaging. They almost see it as, you should appreciate that I helped you out on that day that you were off. And and straight up, they just don't see the same. It doesn't click with them. So when it comes to someone having the best intentions, thinking that they're coming from an effective management or an effective leadership style, of course, they're two very different things. But when they come in with the best intentions, to help the team, but it's actually rubbing off in the wrong way. How is the best way to maybe recognize that or help them to realize that?
Well, I think leaders need to be self-aware. They need to be aware of their environment. They need to try to put themselves in the shoes of their employees and think, how will this be perceived? How will they interpret this? As we said earlier, there's no perfect managers. Everyone's human. Everyone makes mistakes. There's no perfect employees either. So everybody's got to try to do the best they can. If an employee is upset about that, I think they need to go to the manager and say, I'm a little bit frustrated. I was doing XYZ and I came back and it's been done differently. And I'm confused. Why did you jump in and, take over my project and do this and that? So there's got to be good communication. There's got to be trust. There's got to be openness. But I go back to being self-aware. You got to be aware of what you're doing and how you're coming across and how people interpret your actions. And as a manager, leader, you got to be mindful. Everybody is, watching you very closely, what you do, how you do it, what you say, what you don't say. So you got to be realizing that that's everything you say and do is looked at very carefully.
And even now we're using the words leader and manager interchangeably, but leader and manager are very different things.
Yes, they are. And you're right. I look at it this way. Managers use current methods and procedures and processes to get things done. They're more status quo oriented. Leaders focus more on change, right? They want to change something. They want to change the structure or the mission or the people or the approach that is being used. They have a different vision. They think the current system can be improved. So yeah, there's a definite difference, but there is some similarities between the two. Both are working with people and they're trying to get things done and what have you.
Yeah, because like oftentimes like a leader isn't always a good manager. But
True.
and a manager isn't always a good leader, but often when you have someone in the position as the team manager,
Yeah.
it's almost expected of them to also be the team leader,
Yeah.
where it's not, and it's not always the case. Sometimes someone has really good management skills. They're great at, again, managing resources. They can
Hmm.
manage time, they can manage delegating duties, but when it comes to which is the leadership skills, which I look for in terms of having a vision and
Hmm.
communicating that vision.
Hmm.
Um, the three let's say key elements of a leader. This came up earlier in the year. I was asked. I had a job interview, and
Hmm.
the interviewer asked me, because it was a leadership role, what are the key elements of being a leader that you would bring to the team? And
Hmm.
it took me. I took a step back and was like, what are the elements that I look for when I look for a leader?
Hmm.
And I said, oh, communication. Communication is number one. Then
Hmm.
empathy. You have to show empathy for your team. And you also have to be open to change. You have to be adaptable.
Hmm.
And straight up, the interviewer was like, "Oh, well, we were expecting things like decision making and time management."
Hmm.
And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "I see those as manager qualities as opposed to
Yeah.
leadership qualities." And straight off the bat, I was like, "Okay, they're looking for someone with manager qualities and not so much a leader here."
Hmm.
So, and that was something. Once I made that distinction, it kind of helped me to realign myself as to what I was looking for in this new role I was going for. And
Hmm.
so it was very interesting. So I always bring up that question of
Hmm.
what are your three key elements that you expect of a leader to be an effective leader?
Hmm. I think a leader needs to be very good at stating a vision, a direction, a purpose, that the team needs to go in. I think that's very important. I think number two, they need to be able to inspire people. They need to be able to influence people to move in a new direction. And I think number three, they need to be able to implement change effectively. As I said earlier, to me, a leader is wanting to change the status quo. So if I'm a team leader and this team needs to make some significant changes, I need to have leadership skills that can paint the picture of a different future, explain how we're going to get there, inspire them, and then do what I need to do to make it all happen. Um, I personally agree with you that I think most roles today have a combination of management and leadership skills. But depending on the position and depending on your level in the organization, the ratio might be a lot more towards leading and less towards managing. If I'm a first line manager, first line supervisor, let's say, I'm probably spending more time managing than leading. 90% of my job is grinding the hamburger and getting it done. 10% of the time, I'm involved in some sort of change of some sort that I'm promoting and making happen. So it varies, but both sets of skills are important. But I agree, both are different, and some leaders are not very good managers, and as you said, some managers are not very good leaders. So it's important for a hiring manager to understand what's the mixture of skill sets that you need in this job, and look for those in the applicant and make sure you are clear on what you're getting, you know.
Yeah, I do like your three key points because they were like a step further than than mine. Communication, and yours was uh, representing vision. Of course,
Yeah.
you communicate the vision.
Right.
Empathy is again understanding your people so that you know how to inspire and influence. It was the further
Mm-hmm.
step, the further action That it was the
Mm.
action step of my three elements, which kind of again helps reinforce what I look for in a leader. Again, is the same as what you look for as
Mm-hmm.
effective leadership skills. So
Mm-hmm.
and so I
Yep.
find that really interesting that they seem to be the three key elements
Mm-hmm.
that people look for in leadership, as opposed
Mm.
to what again that they're looking for when it comes to recruiting leaders. They look for management skills,
Mm.
and I
Mm.
find that's where the disconnect is that they
Mm.
find someone who has top quality management skills, managerial experience, but
Mm.
when it comes to actually leading the team, they
Mm-hmm.
may have a disconnect. They're like, oh, I don't know how to inspire a team,
Yeah.
but if a team is inspired, I know how to manage them.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. I agree. I agree. Mm.
I think another thing that comes up a lot, especially in the leadership and management space, is when a team can't meet, let's say, they're struggling with demands at work,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to manage a massive workload, and they end up getting overwhelmed and stressed and burned out, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know how to communicate that effectively to a manager.
Mm-hmm.
What would be an effective way to, let's say, approach a manager, or
Mm-hmm.
approach a higher up to open that conversation? Often the time is that people find themselves in that situation, and it's the blame game straight away. They're like, the reason I'm in this situation is
Mm.
because of my manager, it's because of the company, it's because, and it's not, it's there's no two-way dialogue about it. It's always the blame is on them, but they forget
Mm-hmm.
that managers are human too. And
Yeah.
often, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes they do things with the best intention. They
Mm-hmm.
might put extra workload on you because they think that's the responsibility that you want,
Mm-hmm.
or that's the step forward that you want, and they don't realize that it's actually causing more overwhelm and overload on the team than it's actually being productive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think managers and leaders today are under a lot of pressure to get more done faster with fewer resources. So they're applying a lot of pressure on their employees to do more and do it faster. And yeah, people can feel certainly overwhelmed with their workload. The workload keeps getting bigger and bigger and expanding. Everything seems to be a priority. It's very, very, very challenging. I think the employee needs to have the courage to have a candid discussion with his or her boss and state, you've given me 12 priorities or 12 things I have to get done by Friday, and just it's impossible for me to get them all done. We need to have some discussion around what really are the top one or two, three priorities, and you got to decide what can wait. What can we postpone? There's got to be open communications between the two. I certainly agree. Um, Managers aren't perfect, and as I said before, employees aren't perfect. Both have to be willing to have candid conversations about what's most important, what are the really top priorities, and in some cases, what do we need to stop doing? I think sometimes managers don't spend enough time thinking about what can we stop doing. Some things don't add value anymore. So what can we change? What can we eliminate? Sometimes you need to think about what can you do to automate the process? How can you use technology more efficiently to get things done faster or in a different way? Um, Sometimes you can take work pieces or packages and delegate them to a colleague, or someone else in the organization might be better prepared to tackle that project or do that project. So that's, a possibility. But the big idea, I think, is there's got to be open. You got to have, both people have to have the courage to have a candid conversation. Employees don't want to admit that they can't get it all done, even though they can't, so they struggle and they get stressed and they get burnt out. And they never say to the manager, I'm overwhelmed. I just got too much on my plate. I can't get it all done. You need to take some things off, or we need to readjust some of the priorities. They just, they think they're going to be viewed as a incompetent, non-performing employee if they do that, and managers are they're getting so much pressure. They don't want to ask the employee those types of questions. They just want to have the employee go and get it done. So both parties need to be more open and more candid.
Yeah, again, it's trying to open that two-way dialogue,
Yeah.
because there have been there was one story that one of my friends, he was working abroad, and he shared a story of this manager, and I thought this was a one-off manager, probably the most horrible manager I ever heard of. And he tried to open this dialogue with his manager, that he said, look, I'm working on projects A, B, and
Yeah.
C,
Yeah.
and I know project A's deadline is coming up in 2 weeks, but I won't be able to complete that because I'm working on project B and C as well. And
Mm-hmm.
he approached the manager and said, look, I was like, I'm going to be honest with you. It's like, I won't be able to finish project A because of these other two projects.
Yeah.
So either you extend the deadline for project A, or you get someone else to work on project B and C while I
Yeah.
finish project A,
Yeah.
or you get someone else to help me, again, to stay on and help me with project B and C once project A has been finished.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, these are the solutions unless you can come up with another solution. And the manager absolutely lost the plot and was like, how dare
Yeah.
you suggest that, that I didn't give you enough time, that you
Mm-hmm.
can't get this done, are you incompetent, and all this. And he just
Mm-hmm.
completely lost it when red in the face.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so flabbergasted at that. I was gobsmacked.
Yeah.
I was like, how dare that manager approach you like that?
Yeah.
And I mentioned this before. And next thing, after that podcast, I got a lot of backlash because someone said, they were like, how dare you talk about me on your podcast? And they weren't the manager, they were an employee who'd been treated like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh well, no, I wasn't talking about you.
Yeah.
I was actually talking about someone. I didn't know you went through this. And I was like, can we talk
Yeah.
about the fact? And they were like, oh no, you weren't talking about me. No, that's fine. I honestly thought you were putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I was like, I thought this was an isolated incident of one manager in a
Yeah.
different country, maybe a different
Yeah.
culture. Fair enough. I
Yeah.
was like, but this happened closer to home. And I was
Yeah.
like, no, I was like, this is something. It's like, is this? I thought it was a one-off issue, and it's like, is this local issue? Do we just have a bad manager
Mm.
closer to home, or is it something deeper in the culture? Was it
Mm.
something that um is, let's say, in management culture, or is it something that's being passed down from higher up, that the
Mm.
pressure on that manager being
Mm-hmm.
made feel incompetent, and then
Yeah.
having the same attitude on his team,
Yeah.
so that he can basically pressure them into getting the work done so that he can take the results to his higher manager. And it was like, if they keep on having, if this attitude keeps on going down to lower levels, then of course you're going to have teams that are overwhelmed, burnt out,
Yeah.
and underappreciated at work.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, sometimes it's an individual manager that operates that way. Sometimes it's part of the culture. I was reading today about some of the Chinese companies are expecting employees to work 9 to 9, 6 days a week, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Some of the consulting companies, when you first start there, you're working 90-hour weeks. It's just expected. It's part of the culture. There is a cost, though, to burnout. People's productivity goes downhill, and bottom line is you can be a super duper employee, but you can only get so much done, you know? So burnout happens, people resign, people get sick, people get stressed out, their productivity goes down, there's high turnover in companies. So managers can operate that way, but there's an eventual cost to that, and it's not very attractive. I think the good companies, the good managers, the good leaders are mindful of the human resource is a unique, talented resource that they want to maximize the talents of that person. As I said earlier, help them be the best that they can be. And piling on work and yelling and screaming at them and belittling them because they didn't get something done, even though you've given them 28 things to do. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. But yeah, there's managers out there like that. I've met a few in my lifetime as well.
And it's crazy that like they always pile on the work. But if
Yeah.
someone reaches out and say, "Okay, I want to take on more responsibilities, but I don't feel experienced enough. Can I get training on this?"
Mm,
And there's the fear of investing in training someone in case they leave.
mm,
And it's the fear of it's like what if I invest in them and they leave the company?
mm.
And I think was is it the alternative is what if you don't invest in
Yeah,
them and they never
they
leave?
stay. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, the good managers are always looking to coach and develop and give employees feedback that are going to help them grow and challenge them a bit with assignments and help them become the best that they can be. I mean, that's really the goal. Going back to coaching again, same thing with a coach. A coach in sports is trying to help his athletes perform at their best, the team perform at their best, and win games and win championships. So
Yeah, when it comes to the sports things, because I was never the sportiest person, sometimes the analogies go over my head. So
yeah,
and that's where sometimes I feel, is that something that for people who don't understand sports to to a high degree, does that put them at a disadvantage when it comes to the workplace? When a lot of these things have sport analogies and sport metaphors, and sometimes it might be harder to grasp.
yeah.
Do you feel there's a disadvantage to people who don't have the same experience with team sports when it comes to the workplace?
I think there can be. I think I used to be a college teacher, and I realized that sports analogies didn't connect with some students. So I tried to have a mixture of different types of examples and stories and illustrations and what have you. So I think you're right. I think you want to try to present a metaphor or example that's relevant to the person you're working with. If they've never played a sport and they're clueless on sports, then yeah, don't use sports examples as you maybe would with someone else who's been on all sorts of high school and college teams and things like that.
Yeah, because there's sometimes I come across analogy or a business model, and they'd use a different lineup or a different technique, as there's like,
Yeah,
oh, it's just like this in baseball, or it's just like this in
yeah.
football. I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. And they just keep on going with the analogy, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to
Yeah,
listen for another 20 minutes, and if I'm still lost, then the whole concept is beyond me.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I feel another aspect of it is that when people don't play team sports,
yeah.
maybe they're when it comes to working with a team in the workplace, or maybe it's the discipline that comes with uh, participating in a team sport, and the again delegating of duties and knowing the strengths and weaknesses. Maybe that's something that plays to someone's strength when they want to be a manager or a leader.
Yeah, I think that certainly helps. You know, as a player on a team, you get used to setting goals, getting feedback from the coach, working with other team members to collaborate and figure out, certain plays and what to do here and there, so I think those things are all comparable to the work world. I think even if you play an individual sport like tennis or golf, I suppose there's a bigger team that's you're part of. You're getting coaching and helpful comments from your colleagues and teammates, in various ways. So there's a little bit there. So yeah, I think our children, I have a daughter and a son, they both played sports, and they're both in the business world now, and they have said that playing sports, team sports, had really helped them learn a lot of things that they didn't learn so much in the classroom, especially my son. But anyway.
It was funny as well. Another thing to do with sports, and I've always found it, especially with managers, some of them only watch, let's say, like soccer and follow
Yeah.
different teams in soccer. And if they find out that one of their senior managers follows a certain team, they'll
Yeah.
look up all the games that soccer team is playing so that they can network with that manager. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Do you even follow the sport?" And they're like, "No, but I always make sure that I check the scores so that I can start a conversation with him at lunchtime so that I can again network with the senior managers." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay." I was like, if only I was that interested enough in sports to have a conversation about sports. I was like, that's a good concept.
Yeah.
But it was again another aspect of sports, that it was the connection with
Yeah.
the other managers,
Mm-hmm.
that because they come from a sporting background and
Mm.
because they understand the sport again to such a deep level, that
Mm.
there was no easier way to connect with absolutely no other common ground than
Mm.
to just find out who their favorite sports team was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting approach.
I think coming back again to workplace stress,
Yeah.
and definitely something that I do want to touch on before we finish, is you have this very simple formula
Mm-hmm.
for how to manage stress.
Yeah. Yeah. My very simple formula is D. When D is greater than CS, you get stress reaction. So what that means is when your demands exceed your coping skills, you get a stress reaction. Now, let's talk about demands for a minute. Demands really are anything that requires you to do something. We have work demands, family, social, self-imposed. They run the gamut from you got to stop at the grocery store on the way home to buy some milk, to you got to finish a report at work, to you got to write a term paper if you're in college. It's everything you got to get done today. You and I could both make a list of our demands, and it could be 1 to 50 or 1 to 80, who knows. So then our coping skills is how we deal with our demands. And I look at coping skills as a couple different areas. One is our self-management skills. It's kind of like how well we set goals and prioritize and manage our time, make decisions, manage conflicts, all those types of things. That's kind of one area of coping skills. And then secondly, it's what do I do to keep my body in shape? Exercise, meditation, yoga, relaxation techniques. And then thirdly, what do I do to keep my mind in shape, or in shape, I guess. Meditate. Well, yoga would be an example there as well, but things like that. And then finally, the support group. Who can I go to give me some guidance if I need some in handling a particular demand that I'm facing? So if I have great coping skills, I can handle a lot of demands. I can handle a lot on my plate. I can get it all done. I can figure out what to delegate and how to get things done. I can set priorities quickly and all that. But even if I have great coping skills, as we talked about before, that manager who keeps giving me more and more and more and more to do, my demands eventually are going to exceed my coping skills. And when that happens, I'm going to have some sort of stress reaction. Physical could be headaches, high blood pressure, ulcers. Psychological could be anxiety, worry, can't sleep at night, things like that. So as a manager, I need to be mindful of how many demands am I putting on my employees? And secondly, what can I do to help them improve their coping skills? Can I coach them better? Can I give them some feedback? Can I put them through training programs to help them do a better job or learn how to cope better? The problem I see a lot is when people's demands go up and up and up, they stop coping. They stop meditating, they stop working out, exercising, things like that. They're putting all of their time into trying to get their demands done. And what happens is they're more likely to have a big time stress reaction because they're not doing much of anything to cope with it effectively. So that's a danger. Other people use bad coping skills, drinking and excessive eating and things like that. Again, that's not good either. So that simple formula, I think, gives a person or manager the clarity to focus on what can I do to stop or reduce the demands? How can I improve the coping skills so I don't put the person in a stressed out situation? And we all know that when you get burnt out or stressed out, your productivity goes down. And no one wants that. So it's important to keep those things in balance and to figure out what can I do to help my employee and myself, for that matter, be productive and stay productive.
One part of that, and it's often the hard part, especially as a manager, is trying to help your employee to use that time for their coping skill. So if you're giving them, you're like, look, this is a lot. There's a high demand at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
placed upon you, and I
Mm-hmm.
want you to take 1 hour at lunchtime for, let's say, a coping skill, be it exercise, meditation,
Yep. Yep.
or reading or something other
Yep.
than work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's trying to get that into the employee's head that it's not a trick question.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to do this for the greater good, for your
Mm-hmm.
own health, so that you can
Yep.
show up more productive and so that you can show up to your best potential. And
Mm-hmm.
often they see it as, oh, they're testing me. They're testing me to see, will I be lazy for an hour or will I be busy for an hour?
Mm-hmm.
And it's trying to, again, communicate that your best intention for them is to invest that hour
Mm-hmm.
in building on a coping skill. Go
Mm-hmm.
for a walk.
Yep.
Go socialize. Go out with your colleagues and don't talk about work for that hour.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think, as I said earlier, the manager leader, their focus in life should be what can I do to help my employee perform at their best? And they got to, I think, tell the employee that's what they're there for. That's what their mission is. And when they say to the employee, I want you to take an hour each day this week for lunch, and I want you to do some relaxation techniques or go for a walk around the building or whatever, um, the employees got to believe that it's sincere, it's honest, it's straightforward. It's not a test. You're trying to help the person make sure they're getting away from their work to unwind a little bit because that's important.
And one thing you mentioned there as well were the, let's say, the negative coping skills in
Yeah.
terms of binge eating or turning to drink, or
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, they always turn to stimulants. They either turn to caffeine or they turn to
Yeah.
sleeping aids,
Yep.
and they're two very prevalent, very abused substances, especially in Western culture, where you're in a society driven by productivity, and it's basically caffeine all day, and
Hmm.
then night all are a sleeping aid at night.
Yeah.
Um, what do you feel? What do you feel is the best way to, or maybe not the best way? What do you feel is an effective way to help people maybe substitute from either of those when because of course there's a sweet spot when it comes to either or, especially caffeine helps you up to maybe
Hmm.
your second or third cup of coffee, and after that you're kind of
Yeah.
it kind of goes in the wrong direction. You've kind of lost all the benefits.
Hmm.
um and it's trying to help communicate with the people that yes, there is a sweet spot with these substances in moderation,
Yeah.
but they you need to, let's say, incorporate different coping skills, maybe
Mm.
that it's a combination of different coping mechanisms or coping skills that are going to serve you in the long run. So rather
Yeah.
than relying on, I think a better way of saying this is rather than relying on one specific coping skill, it needs to be a multitude, it needs to be a variety of different coping skills.
Hmm. Yeah. The company I used to work at, we would bring in periodically seminars, 1 hour, 2 hour seminar on various aspects of coping skills, like proper diet, proper exercise. So bringing in sometimes some outside resources to present a 1 hour seminar on effective diets or healthy eating, or what it looks like, or the consequences of excessive drinking or excessive sleeping aids or whatever, can be an effective thing to do. I mean, that shows the employees that the company is taking this seriously, and they're trying to teach us and educate us to what's appropriate and where's the fine line between drinking 2 cups of coffee a day versus 12 cups of coffee a day. So things like that can be helpful, and I think productive, and that can send a very important message that, again, we care about you, we want you to be at your best, we want to help you in any way we can, and we're offering these seminars.
Yeah, it's a great concept.
Mm.
I think the other element was reducing the demands. Is that a matter of just having a conversation with the manager to say, look, this is how we can maybe prioritize certain demands,
Yeah.
rather than I think when it comes to time managing and time budgeting of trying to get all the tasks done in a day,
Hmm.
um, rather than yeah, people don't always look at it as what's the one task I need to finish today? What's the priority task?
Hmm.
Often I've come across managers who say these are the priorities, and you approach them and say, okay, you've given me three priorities today.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which one is number one priority? If you need the three of them done and only one can be done today,
Yeah.
which one is the priority? And then they're
Yeah.
like, no, all of these need to be done. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like, but, and you literally need to sit them down and say, but of the three of these, only one is
Hmm.
physically possible to be done
Hmm.
correctly today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
which one is it? And they're still shaking their heads, being like, I don't care how you do it. We need all three today.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, it's like, if you want all three, we're going to need three people.
Mm.
And
Mm.
it's trying to be logical
Hmm.
sometimes, and they're like,
Yeah.
and they see it as, okay, you're not being productive enough, and it's like, no, at the end of the day, a lot of the time that people get stressed out is because they care about the work they do.
Yeah.
They care about the integrity, their values. At the end of the day, they want to show up with their best potential. They want to
Hmm.
go home with that job satisfaction.
Hmm.
And if
Yeah.
they're made feel that, okay, you need to hit the deadline, but they miss the job satisfaction because they're not proud of the work they did because they felt rushed,
Yeah.
then it's a loss for both the company and for the employee, because there's no job satisfaction and there's poor results.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than saying like, okay, I did my best on the
Mm-hmm.
one project, the other two are there for tomorrow or the day after,
Yeah.
or the other two, I am glad that I left them in someone else's hands so
Mm-hmm.
that they can focus on just that one project and I can focus my sole attention on this project.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a hard concept for some people to grasp.
Mm. It is. I think sometimes if the employee goes in with a plan of some sort, that you've given me three priorities. I can't get them all done today. I can get number one done, but number two and three, I'm not going to be able to get done until 2 days from now. Or it might be best if you took priority number two and gave that to, Joe. He has some expertise in this area and maybe he can find a way to get it done. Or I suggest on one of these projects, we call the customer, maybe it's an internal customer for that matter, and see if we can renegotiate the deadline because we just can't get it done this quickly. So sometimes going in with a little more thought other than, you gave me three, I can't get them done, I can only do one. The problem now is back on the manager. So as an employee, what can I do to help my manager? Offer your manager some solutions and some pathways for him to think about or her to think about of how to get all three done in a decent time frame, I guess. Let's say that. Going back to demands, though, I think employees need to look at the big picture sometimes too and look at all of their life. What are my life demands? And sometimes, as I said, they look at their family. Let me back up. When I was teaching, I taught some night classes, and I had some ladies that were in my class, and their demands were, off the chart. They were working a full-time job, demanding job. They were taking 3 courses at night, and they were raising 2 to 4 children at home. And just their complexity of their world in terms of what they had to get done each day was mind-boggling. So when you step back and look at what's on your plate in all these different areas, oftentimes it's way, way, way too much, and I would coach some of them like, why do you need to take 3 courses this semester? Why don't you just take one? And why don't you do this differently at home? And why don't you delegate some tasks to your husband to see if he can do this and that? So looking at the bigger picture, I think, is also important when you're looking at all of the demands in your life.
Yeah, I think that's something that people always focus on the work demands,
Yeah,
and they never try to balance their personal life demands as well.
right.
Because that was something as well that happened in my own when I completely burnt out. It wasn't just what I was doing at work; it was
Mm-hmm.
every hour that I spent outside of work.
Yeah,
I'd almost feel restless or that I was being lazy if I sat down for an hour by myself.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
was looking for any personal responsibilities or commitments or anything in my community that I could get involved with.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, it all became overwhelming because
Yeah,
I didn't want to let anyone down.
yeah,
And again, it's especially with women, especially with mothers, that they're always trying to please and support everyone else
yeah.
around them, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why they're so prone to overwhelm and burnout.
Mm. Yeah, you have to learn to be able to say no in a nice way. I know some of my family members that volunteer for anything and everything. They're always willing to help and support, even though the demands on their plate are just overflowing and it's way, way, way too much to be volunteering for anything. But if someone asks them, will you handle this or do this or help here? They absolutely, sure. So you got to learn to say no in a nice way.
Yeah, I think when it comes to it, when it comes to renegotiating your demands,
Mm,
it's instead of a straight up no, which is very uncomfortable for people on either end of the answer, or the no. It's finding a constructive no.
right.
It's the same. It's the same as any time you have a negative thought. It's better to have a constructive narrative on that negative thought.
Yeah.
That or that no. It's always no. I can't do that now, but we can do this instead. Or
Mhm.
how about we do this instead? And you
Mhm.
come to a compromise or negotiate, and you're setting a boundary um, as to what your limit is, but
Mhm.
at the same time also negotiating what will be a more feasible option,
Mhm.
or where could someone meet you halfway.
Mhm. Or you can tell them that I'd love to help you, but I have these other three priorities I need to get done, and I just can't at this time. But
Yes, and you help them to
next month or
understand. Yes,
next year, whatever, come back and ask me again, and I'll see what I can do. But right now, I just can't.
yes.
Yeah.
Again, it's understanding that everyone is human. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the hardest things for people to understand themselves, is that they're also human.
Yeah.
And it's at the end of the day, we often forget that we
Yeah.
are human, and
Yeah.
that we have our limits,
Yeah.
and we can only serve to our best within
Yeah.
those limits.
Yeah. Absolutely correct. And as we've talked about, getting stressed out or burnt out makes your productivity go downhill quickly, and you're just not getting it done. And that's not good. That's not
Amen.
good for anybody, you know?
So, Paul, if anyone wants to get in touch, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, I'll just put in a little plug if I can for
Of
my books.
course.
I've written several books. They're on Amazon. The two that I think are very helpful is Leadership Styles is very helpful. Actually, three. Leadership Styles is helpful. Um, is your organization aligned is a separate one. And the third one is Performance Management for New Managers. I think that's a useful book. All of my books are short and to the point. One of them is 35 pages long, so it's not a long read. It's quick. I try to boil things down to the basics, and so that might be something you might want to check out. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. If you just put my name in LinkedIn, you'll see my blog and stuff there. So if you want to see what I'm thinking about and posting each day, you can go on there and check me out there.
Awesome, Paul. Again, thank you so much for joining the show. It was great having you.
Thank you, Eugene. I appreciate good conversation, and I learned a lot. Thanks.